Okay, we're going to start off with a little bit of a quiz here to see how well you can do with fractions and decimals. All right, we'll start with the first one. Any fraction we would have that is over 100, if I was to ask you to write that as a decimal, most of you can remember from earlier years or maybe even last year. But if not, ask yourself, how would you say this? And if you said to yourself that this was 10 hundredths, that's exactly how you should it be written. But you might say, well, wait a minute, that sounds good, but I don't know where those places are when we're talking about place value. Well, just as a little hint, this place to the left of your decimal would be the ones place. This place to the left of the ones place would be, you guessed it, the tens place. Well, on the other side, there is no oneths place, but there is a tenths place. So that's the first place to the right of the decimal. The second place to the right of the decimal would be the hundredths. And don't forget that TH at the end, THS, hundredths. So if I said this was 10 hundredths, I would write it here with a 0 in front. Now, this is how I know. Pretend like that decimal and the, right here, the decimal, let me select the correct one here. The decimal and the 0 weren't there, and just say this number. Well, this number right here would just be 10 by itself. In order to say the decimal properly, you would say 10, and then you'd say the digit and the last place value. You'd say that place. So we come down here and we see it's called hundredths. So we would say this place again, 10, and this place, hundredths. I'm going to give you one more example so you know exactly what I'm saying here. I'm going to write this decimal, and let's say it's 0.14. Well, this is my last place, so watch what I do. I'm going to say that it is 14, and the last place is in the hundredths. 2 places to the right, the hundredths. So this is 14 hundredths. Okay, with that out of the way, we need to now take a look at how to write some a little bit more difficult numbers as decimals, fractions as decimals. So we do know that 10 hundredths would be written as 0.10 or 10. And remember that last digit, hundredths. Well, what if I was to give you 24 hundredths? Don't be nervous by the 24 at the top. It's going to look very close to the same. 24, the last place is in the hundredths place. This bottom number tells us what place we're talking about. 24 hundredths. This bottom number, by the way, is called our denominator. Alright, well, just in case you're not quite sure yet, let's do one more. Let's say 67 hundredths. Well, that would be written 67 hundredths, like that. You could take any 2-digit number that is over 100 and simply copy it down 2 places to the right. So let me show you what I mean. If we have 98 hundredths, that would be equal to 0.98 or 98 hundredths. Okay, now what happens if it's not over 100? Let's say it was 8 tenths. Well, if we remember our places, this would be the tenths place right here. This would be the ones place here. We know that this is actually the hundredths. This is the tens. But 8 tenths. All I need to do is write the 8 in the tenths place. 0 here, and I'm done. Because this is 8, and it's in the tenths place. Now if I gave you another one, let's say it's a little bit more of a challenge, let's say 9 tenths, it would be 0.9, or 9 tenths. If I was to give you a problem like 3 tenths, you'd have to write 0.3 because that 3 is now in the tenths place. So, well done. And then we're going to end on discussing some other fractions that maybe you aren't as sure about, but we've definitely discussed these. Let's say you were given 1/4. Fourths are not nearly as difficult because we can think of money. Think of 4 quarters make $1. We're going to pretend like each one of these are quarters and that these make $1. Now, if we only have one out of all 4, how much money do we have? Well, we have 25 hundredths, or 25 cents. And then you could kind of pretend like that dollar sign is there, but just because it's 1/4 doesn't necessarily mean we need to put that. Now, if it said 1/4 of $1, then you'd write 25 cents. Okay, so 1/4 is equal to 0.25, and this is just something that you'll just have to learn and remember and memorize it. Okay, let's say we have 3/4. Well, I'm going to look at my quarter design down here and decide 3 out of the 4 quarters would equal how much money? Well, 3 out of 4 would be 75 hundredths, or 75 cents, which is 75 hundredths. Also, we could have 1/2. Let's pretend like these are $half. If I had 1 out of 2, or 1/2, I would have 50 cents, or 0.5. It's also acceptable to write 0.50. Either one is the same. And lastly, we're not going to talk too much about this, but I just want to show it to you as an introduction. If I had, let's say, 1/5, and I wanted to turn that into a decimal, well, what I would do, because we have something called the equivalent fractions rule, if I make the numerator and the denominator something different or out of 10, it can help me translate this into a decimal easier. There will come a time where you don't need to necessarily do that. You'll know because you've worked with these numbers quite a bit. But just like on the first page or the second page when we talked about tenths, 2 tenths would be 2, and it's in the tenths place. If I multiply the numerator and denominator by the same number, which in this case I did 2 because I was trying to get it out of 10, then we will get an equivalent fraction. Now also, if I was to, let's say, make 2/5, if I did the same thing times 2, the numerator and denominator, I would get an equal or an equivalent fraction. Whoops. Let's erase that. I would get 4 tenths, which would equal 0.4, because 4 is in the tenths place. Again, all I'm doing is I'm trying to make this denominator a number I'm used to seeing, like a tenth, to make it easy to turn into a decimal. Let's do one more. Let's say 4/5. If I multiplied a fifth by 2, I know it would be over 10. 5 times 2 is 10. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 tenths. On the first, you showed that you could definitely write 8 tenths as a decimal. 8 in the last place is in the tenths. So this would be 8 tenths.